Hey! Silence time. Please!
I love that typing sound. So funny.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I didn't think it was that audible. 1 second.
It's all right.
Alright, we'll start again. Hello, this is the QUACKCAST. I'm Ozone Ocean, and with me is Baines and Tance. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is a QUACKCAST number 417, and we're going to talk about can we be better? Well, not that so much. The idea of social marketing as a new kind of marketing and the problems it brings to society, because we all know about the so-called culture wars, which are really the pop culture wars. And it's problematic, but the problem isn't because what we think about, trolls and progressives. It's slightly different than that. It's corporate marketing, the problems that brings. But before we get into that, I've got to talk about the featured comic. The featured comic this week was Redneck. So I'm going to be talking about Redneck. Here I am now. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and the feature I'm reviewing this week was Redneck. Clint returns to his podunk town with a hillbilly mullet and wild tales of war among the stars, blood, death, alien abduction, lizardmen, cat people, and glory. Redneck is a wild sci-fi action story about Redneck Clint, who was abducted by aliens shortly after a hellish tour of duty fighting in Vietnam. He ends up fighting as a gladiator in an arena against otherworldly antagonists. The rest is history. Redneck has an unconventional story structure, with Clint relating episodes from his adventures, not necessarily in order. The character Hunter is influenced by Jumanji, and Clint's adventures are strongly reminiscent of Burroughs' John Carter of Mars. The art is heavily stylized, with flat digital color. This is a compelling story. Very compelling, you'll rush through this. But you may find the unconventional story structure a bit tricky to sort of get around to, because he's remembering tales from his past. We start off in the middle of the story when Clint is back in the little town, reconnecting with his friends, and then he reminisces an episode from what's happened to him, and then he reminisces again, and you get slightly further back in time for when he actually was abducted and went to the stars, from his days as a soldier fighting in Vietnam. So it's an interesting story structure. It's a pleasant, fun little way of doing things. There's many influences. The artist Metsuki has informed me that he had also had many other influences, like Thundercats, V, which was the V series, where people are really lizard people taking over. Usagi Yojimbo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Star Trek, and many, many things. There's many things, but the Jumanji was quite a big thing there. Quite a big influence that I noticed, the Hunter character. And also John Carter of Mars. If you've seen the movie, you'll know, but also, obviously, Burroughs wrote many, many stories about this character, and you even see the famous paintings by Frank Frazetta of the John Carter of Mars there, with his barbarian kind of leather harness and sexy ladies with him. So yeah, it's pretty cool work, and it's great to see those influences right on show. It's a fun comic, so read it. Redneck by Metsuki, rated T. And that was our featured comic, Redneck. So enjoy that. Okay. Next up, we have the featured music Gunwallace has given us this week. The Lightning Orb. The lightning orb zaps, shocks, sparks, electrified plasma arcing through open air with the hot, burning smell of fresh ozone. Invisible pulses through the flat gold wire circuits printed on green silicon as electrons are exchanged at almost the speed of light. Take it away, Gun Wallace, with the lightning orb. And that was a lightning orb. Thank you very much for that, Gun Wallace. And Lightning Orb is a comic by A.W. Wilson, and it's rated T, and I believe I featured it. That was the one where you have people who are like superheroes fighting, and they have all sorts of powers, and they fight in an arena. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're into the QUACKCAST.
All right.
Right, so this time we're talking about stuff. Now I'll introduce it to make it a bit more less vague. Okay, so I'm chatting about something that's related to Baines's news post of Thursday, when Baines talked about the idea of Rotten Tomatoes having removing its like community voices section. Well, it's removing this section where people talk about new movies that are coming out on TV shows and.
Yeah, it's unreleased movies. Interested or like, are you interested? Or are you not interested? So there was a percentage of people who are interested and who are not. And then comments could go in the section as well. People talk about why are they interested or want to watch it, or why are they not interested or don't want to watch it.
Exactly.
The Captain Marvel rating was plummeting. I happened to be following this on YouTube that day. And then that afternoon, Rotten Tomatoes shut down that part of the site. So you could no longer say you were not interested in seeing this movie.
And a lot of people automatically go and say, yeah, well, why didn't they do that earlier? That's a good thing because it gets rid of trolls and blah, blah. And we'll talk about that aspect and why that is quite a bad thing. So we're not going to talk about the rights and wrongs of what, like, trolls are bad and Brie Larson, I think that's the actor's name in Captain Marvel. Whether what she said is good or bad, I've no idea. I don't care. What we're chatting about here is the role community voices play now in this modern world in marketing and promotion. Word of mouth is an old way of things sort of being promoted. Generating viral. When we used to have word of mouth. And things would go viral. Now that is no longer a thing. Things aren't naturally going viral. Now we have campaigns that deliberately manipulate groups in order to make things go viral in a more scientific way. Because, this company is very on top of these things. They study it. They, have people doing doctorates on this kind of thing. They know what is going to generate buzz. They know what's going to play into the whole pop culture wars, I suppose, or what's going to create movements and things like that. They know that in a pretty simplistic way. it's not as advanced as we might think sometimes. It's very crude, but certain things will set people off and start buzz and start, start a bit of a fire. The marketers generally do not care about trolls. They don't, they don't care when people are sexist or whatever. They don't care about actors going off message by saying stupid things. None of that really matters to marketers. All that matters is that the topics they're paid to promote become trending keywords on Google, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and hopefully then get into the news. That's all the marketers care about. That's what they're paid to do. And so that's what they do. They create the buzz in order for this thing hopefully to blow up. Whereas the content, like the big production companies, they do care because they start to get worried that things are going off message or things are getting out of control. So yeah, there's competing kind of factors in this. All right. So to that end, these marketers choose intentionally controversial things, controversial ways in which to approach things. So if it's a movie featuring a woman, suddenly there will be this is this is pro women's rights. This is this kind of thing, even though the movie isn't necessarily when you take the movie and really watch it, it isn't really pro anything. It's just a movie that happens to have a female protagonist. But the marketers have sort of created this idea, this buzz within the community, so you get people promoting it because of this, you get people hating it because of that, and that creates the buzz. So yeah, that's the way the entertainment products are getting sort of pushed regardless. They're being pushed in a political kind of way. So shutting down community voices in the way that's happened with the Rotten Tomatoes is a worrying trend. It's likely the threat of lost advertising revenue was used as leverage against Rotten Tomatoes to make this change, because Disney didn't like the buzz. It didn't like the direction the buzz was taking. And we know that advertising revenue has been used as a hammer to shut things down before, because YouTube has suffered this massively, hugely, in the past 3 years. This has been an incredible hammer against everything. And again, at the moment, it's being used as a hammer currently on YouTube, because there's this idea of pedophiles using comment sections in order to secretly commenting children or whatever.
Right,
It's just...
My next news post is about Gag Orders Part 2 coming on Thursdays, about that, expanding on this whole thing.
Insanely stupid. Maybe they're really doing this, but it's probably being blown massively out of proportion. But what has happened is huge brands have gone to Google and they've said, okay, we're not going to advertise on you ever again. We're going to pull out all our advertising. And so Google has, YouTube, Google is the company that controls YouTube, has now absolutely shut down the commenting sections of all sorts of massive YouTube channels. No one is allowed to comment on them anymore because of this fear of pedophiles. Oh my God, it's just insane.
Which is really a fear of, I know you're already saying, fear of loss of advertising dollars.
Yeah, exactly. YouTube, Google don't care
really
about that. They only care about the advertising dollars. Yeah, and the brands don't care about pedophiles. They only care about people pulling their patronage from them because they happen to be advertising somewhere, that's associated with something. So yeah, it's all about fear. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, but the important thing to remember is that even though the people make attempts to manipulate where buzz goes, they cannot control everything about it. So once something takes off, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, like a fire. So we don't want to fall into the trap of conspiracy thinking where we think, just because we've seen someone pull the strings in a certain way, they're pulling the strings with everything. That's not what happens. These kind of attempts to manipulate the common ways of thinking, and manipulating groups politically are crude. It's not a kind of it's not a kind of delicate science. This is very crude and it's very simple, and much more of it is done. Is chaotic because things go where people don't expect, and you have people taking things and running with it. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So we can talk about manipulation, but we can't get sort of carried away with the idea, because that is classic conspiracy thinking.
That way lies madness.
True.
The thing is,
I fall into that sometimes, I have to admit.
We all do.
It's easy to. Yeah,
we all do.
It's a natural thing.
And we all do and we all don't, in a sense, because the whole label of conspiracy theory is also a label that is meant to sort of discredit certain notions that sometimes deserve the discrediting and sometimes they don't. And the cusp of the matter lies in the word conspiracy, maybe, because we are not talking about people that conspire to do certain things. We are talking about panels that are trained and educated to create a specific situation that will also have, like, a give or take a standard deviation of reaction that they expect, and they do plan for it. It's nothing secret. People do have departments. When I say people, I don't mean people. I mean corporations and conglomerates that have departments that deal with the public opinion. That includes governments. That includes huge NGOs and so on and so forth. They do have departments that deal with the social standing and face of a particular campaign, of the company overall, and so on and so forth. And they are the ones that determine the strategy that they plan to use in order to create certain results, so to speak. So that is not conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory would be like taking this reality and cracking it up to 11, that they are, I don't know, projecting messages through TV and stuff like that.
And conspiracy thinking is also taking the idea too far, as saying, okay, they're pulling the strings to making us think that way, and then this thing that happens was also their design. And oh my God, if I think this way, maybe I'll be falling into the trap of thinking what they want me to think, because
that's reverse psychology, by the way. That is also another thing they use. But the thing is that,
but if you take that too far, then you're falling into the trap of thinking that everything is controlled. But it's not. They can't. It's a trap to fall into. All right. Exactly. So anyway, before we get too hung up in the abstract, because that's not really interesting, we've got to let's contextualize this. Okay, so a real world example is like the Gillette advertisement, "We can be better," and the reason for that whole "we can be better" thing is because Gillette wants to use social marketing in order to create a buzz. So they don't really care about which side of the pop culture war or the culture war they fall on. Gillette doesn't really want to make men less sexist or more responsible or nicer or whatever. Gillette wants to sell razors. That's what they want to do. And the good way to do that is by raising the level of their brand, getting it in more people's minds so they know the name Gillette. How do you do that? You got to get people talking about it. How do you get people talking about it? Well, do something that makes people angry or makes people think, or whatever it gets into people's minds. And how they did that was they did this "We Can Be Better," which got a lot of buzz. Then it broke over onto the news and into all the blogs. It became viral. It was a massive success. The political message, "We Can Be Better," was crude, it was simplistic, it was childish, it was didactic, it was incredibly, it was divisive in a way, but in a really childish kind of way, because it's so simplistic. But that's really irrelevant to the message of the market, to the objectives of the marketers. It succeeded.
Yeah, I think did it succeed?
Yeah,
I've read a little bit here and there about how they were maybe specifically targeting certain demographics, and it worked.
Well, it's
younger men and women. I have read, and I think it seems true, that this is the demographic they were targeting. This stuff is very clinical, like you were saying. Like they're doing these things deliberately. This stuff doesn't happen by accident. And I think it did work on that level. They got more. They did more business with younger men, and I think with women. I don't remember exactly the stats I read. Older men were outraged, statistically speaking. I'm not saying everyone was outraged and all younger men were not, but generally existing customers, longtime customers of Gillette, were offended by the ad.
But the thing is, though, with the direct communication isn't so much important. Like, we want to sell to them, we don't want to sell to them. It's the fact that increases brand awareness. So, which is a more long-term.
Oh yeah. I totally agree that this was their job and their mission, like to get a conversation going. I don't know if you said it on this recording yet or on the other recording, but to get those keywords showing up online, and to sort of get a conversation started and get, hopefully, awareness, and like you just said, and people talking about it. Unfortunately, you've also gotten to this already. Once that happens and you start that spark, you don't control where it goes, from where that fire goes from there. And it's risky, because when people start talking, like you run the risk of backlash, and the backlash kind of overpowering. I'm not saying that happened in this case, but that is the risk you run. And we've seen it in movies, definitely since Ghostbusters 2016, and since then it's been repeated, like similar.
The movies, it can be. I was just going to say, the movies, it's far more problematic in terms of a razor. It's a meaningless thing, They can try and be the advertising campaigns can try and be dogmatic. They can try and have propaganda. They can try and say whatever. It doesn't matter. They're only selling razors. And when you buy a razor, you're still going to have to shave yourself anyway. And what you're going to buy? You're going to buy a brand You're not going to think, oh, God, this encourages a certain political viewpoint if I shave myself with them and if I don't shave myself. In the end, you're not really losing out. But with films, if you don't go and see them, and you don't need to go and see a film, so that if a marketing campaign turns you off a film, then they lose out millions and billions of dollars worth of revenue. So social media marketing campaigns have far greater risk in films. So sorry, Tansi.
Yeah, I was going to probably go there anyway. So what I wanted to underline, to bring attention to, is that the problem with these things is that they have this tendency of creating a particular manner of discourse, which is very toxic, and it is very dangerous for actual discourse, for actual discussion and actual constructive dialogue that will lead the community, the global community, towards a common consensus that in turn later is going, or immediately, whatever, is going to improve conditions in society. This cannot happen right now. Why? Exactly because, especially in areas like movies and things that need to be consumed only on the merit of their content rather than things that you absolutely need to consume in order to live and function in society, then they need to be far more aggressive, and they need to force you, quote unquote, to do certain things and to engage in specific behaviors. And this, again, is something that people, especially in industrial fields of psychology and social psychology and psychology of propaganda and so on and so forth, learn. And it is that you have to engineer the result that you want, which is extremely sinister. In my opinion, this shouldn't be allowed. But it is a thing, and it happens, and it is legal yet. And the whole thing, how does it work? The mechanics of the matter is that they single out the sensitive chords, let's say, of a very specific need that we have as human beings, as creatures. And that is the sense of belonging, the feeling of belonging to the greater sum that is our society, and also being approved by the greater sum that is our society, to have like all the check marks down as social beings. And so what they are trying to do is they are trying to tell you that in order to get this approval, in order to be correct for the society that you want to belong in, you have to engage in A, B, C, or D behaviors, very specific behaviors. You have to do certain things, read certain things, say certain things. Otherwise, you are not part of the society. You are not good enough. Or even worse, for the ever more aggressively constructed campaigns, you are the enemy. You are the one we hate. You are the one we seek to destroy and annihilate from society. They make you, when I say, I don't mean physically necessarily, and just the fact that I need to say necessarily is a statement, but it's like we are going to make you marginalized if you don't do certain things. And this is the problem. And this is where the toxicity lies, because it kills discourse. Like, if you voice certain objections, immediately you get castigated, and that's that. Nobody continues to talk. Exactly. Like, how dare you? There you go.
So
now you don't exist.
Specifically, like in a real world example.
Castigated. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
to contextualize this, okay, so the Ghostbusters film. So we have female actors instead of the expected male actors originally. So then now this has become a political statement. So we're being what would you say, like gender positive or something like that. We're being feminist with a film. I don't know. Maybe, it's not a feminist film per se. It's just a film. It's just an entertainment thing. But that's the way they're selling it. So in order, if you like this film, then you are pro-feminist. You're pro-women. You're pro. You're on the good side of history. And if you're against it, if you're against the film, you're old-fashioned, you're patriarchal, you're, what are these terms, like a crybaby man or something, I don't know.
Man baby. The term is man baby.
Yeah. That I'm only saying this like to contextualize it. I'm not agreeing with any of that. I'm not like putting. I'm not going to fall
You're
into
saying
the
this
trap
is
of,
what they're thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works in a real world example, not necessarily.
So let me just to pause there for a second. Why do you think? I mean, to me, at least part of the motivation for that is at what stage it comes. I don't know, like whether you see backlash or you see criticism and then it happens, or it's preemptive for to make your product critic proof. You create this thing, like you want to protect yourself from criticism.
I think that, like I was saying before, these things are chaotic. You create the buzz by turning something into a political, giving something a political dimension.
And you probably are thinking, marketing. You probably are thinking also, like, let's get more women to see Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
In the case of that.
Absolutely.
Because it's more male audience. They're like, well, let's get the rest of this audience. Like, let's change it up. And probably people involved have a personal interest as well. I know the people involved in that movie definitely did. They have this kind of their personal politics. They have beliefs that they want to champion. And other people want to look good at these, very, very, very fancy cocktail parties. By like sort of and things they talk about in those circles, I'm sure, are along these lines,
And I don't think that was a very political movie at all. I don't think even the marketing for that. I don't think that was intentionally divisive. I think it became that way because it was poorly handled, and it got away.
Oh from yeah.
I think they were. I think their initial approach was always very positive. They didn't want to turn it into like girls good, men bad thing. I don't think that was ever their objective. I think that's what it became because these things are hard to control, and it just went away from them.
I have to say again, drawn from my schooling. Basically, there is a certain, let's say, package of things that go with a specific move when you make a power move like this, because this is a power move. You want to force an audience, a social group to do certain things. So, for example, when you market something as this is an X movie, whoever doesn't want to see this movie is not X, whatever that is. Okay, I'm just presenting it as a formula right now. You immediately shield yourself from two things. First of all, actual evaluation of the content. The content itself becomes irrelevant anymore because you have already labeled it. It hasn't come from grassroots, let's say. It hasn't come from the feedback that you get after the product is exposed to the public. You already tell the public what it is. So evaluation of the content is off the table. And the second thing is that acceptance of the product again is off the table. You are forced to accept it or reject it, depending. Because if you don't do it, then you get slapped with a particular label. So what happens is that the movie itself, and whether it is what they say they package it as, doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if it's just a simple movie. It doesn't matter if it is a good movie or a bad one. Because now the discussion has shifted from is this a good movie, do we like it, and do we go watch it, to are we so and so, and how are we going to prove it, by going to see this movie, and we don't care if it is good or bad. We have to go see it to prove that we are so and so. And these aren't thoughts that happen necessarily cognitively, like in your consciousness. These are emotional reactions. These are knee-jerk reactions that they are seeking to create in you. Again, this is not random. What is random is how far this effect goes and how far beyond the movie this thing will spill. Because, like, for example, I think my opinion with the whole Ghostbusters thing, I think this was the first attempt and it was a bit rougher. But now with every movie that comes out with this kind of marketing, you see more sophistication. You see this vanguard of blog posts and articles coming out and already selling you the premise that this is the super feminist or the super progressive or the super diverse or the super whatever, blah, blah, blah.
This is obviously what very intentional.
Yeah, especially considering and going off the fact that a lot of digital magazines and sites, news sites, have admitted that in order to have access to exclusives and to interviews with famous actors and movie producers and creators and executives of movies and series, they have to keep to a specific rhetoric. Otherwise, and to support all the movies that they are being given to support. Otherwise, they get shut out. So that means that you get a very controlled, militaristic almost to a point, first wave of, okay, this is the movie coming out and this is how it has to be and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then you get preemptive, whoever doesn't do such and such is a troll. So again, you have the categories set out and the quality of the movie itself is never discussed. I mean, look for it. Look to see who is discussing the art. And you will see that it is almost nobody. Everyone is discussing the politics of the movie goer or the movie or both.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. So,
go on.
No, that's it.
I just want to touch on the fact, okay, so, and there's a couple of things to remember here. Okay, so this is, we want to be balanced about these things and say, oh, the right does this, the left does this. Look, the reality is the social marketing is only done in a progressive way. That's the only way that it's done because that is the way it works. You can't socially market something that is conservative or aggressive because that just doesn't work. So that isn't a two-sided thing. Where it is two-sided is with the trolling reaction against these things and those kind of almost activist organized campaigns of people like review bombing and saying massive kind of sexist campaigns through sites like 4chan, things like that. They organize these kind of hate campaigns. Then there's a two-sided thing. Okay. And I don't want to get caught up in like saying, okay, so the people who don't like these things are the bad guys and the people who do promote it are the good guys because, you know, that's falling into the same trap of you know, being manipulated. But, okay, so, where was it going with that? Damn it. I was like trying to contextualize.
So many disclaimers.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So
we have to tread so carefully.
It is a one-sided thing. Social marketing always goes on that leftist point of view. Okay, that's just how it is. That the people who get caught up in it, going on, you know, either side or whatever, they are not. That is a two-sided thing. It's just that the marketing comes from that leftist point of view. And I'm not saying that the marketing is like leftist. It's just using that mechanism because that's what's going to get, things happening. That's what's going to get the popular stuff going. All right, that's an important thing to realize. It's not leftist propaganda. When people are being feminist with this, taking a feminist approach with the marketing, or like being gender positive, or trying to be less racist with this stuff, it isn't they're not doing it because they want to be a propagandist, or they want to force these views upon you. They're just using that because they know it will create a buzz, and they know that it will engender this kind of discussion. So they're using it in that way. They're manipulating both sides. But it only works with a leftist approach. That's what I'm saying. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does. The thing is that, and I want to actually move away from the motivation of these people, and which definitely comes down to making money. Okay.
Yeah.
And having profit, whatever that is. And I want to move to the impact of this whole situation.
Yeah.
And the impact is very serious in many ways. I think we're going to feel it for a good few years to come, and not in a very good way, because you see what you see happening is that people either are not taught, the younger cohorts that come into the general discourse and the public forums and everything, they are not taught how to discuss and how to argue. They actually don't know how to do it. And those that do, of the older generations, assuming that you have a bigger percentage of people that know how to do that in those cohorts, are forced not to, either because they don't want to get involved in a flaming war between accounts, in Facebook or Twitter or whatever, or because they actually don't see any constructive value in doing it anymore, because people generally have stopped actually discussing, actually going to generally exchange ideas to reach a common consensus that can be beneficial for the common good, for the community, if you like. So that means that you get more and more polarity between people that become more and more entrenched in sets of ideas, and sets of ideas that have some good surface elements and a ton of bad practical underlying elements, like enforcing your will through violence and through blackmail, whatever blackmail that is, emotional or otherwise, like I said before, gag everyone that you cannot shoot down with your arguments, and generally be, in a very big sense of the word, employing Goebbelist methods of discourse that are not discourse, actually. Like, actually, we are experiencing a very rapid fascist approach in interactions beyond the movie propaganda or the movie marketing, or however you want to call it. People are being taught that this is how you win, quote unquote, arguments. Yeah. And this is problematic, because this is behavior taught, and this behavior will and does translate to real life. like beyond Twitter, beyond Facebook, beyond, wherever. And it is a very slippery slope. We have begun sliding together, all together as society. And, there is only one way to go when you slide, where gravity takes you. And it's not a good place.
Yeah. You're right. So you're talking about this from the way it affects individuals. And it because of these, these social marketing approaches and the chaotic nature of, where things go. Yeah, so that's messing up the discourse between individuals, and we're becoming more polarized, basically. Far more polarized in our thinking, and just joining our little camps and sticking to them. The other aspect of this is corporations now controlling. Well, that sounds really Orwellian. That sounds more conspiracy theory, but it is true because So
what? So what? It's actually objective.
Well, yeah,
that's the point.
I don't want to muddy the message though, but So you have these corporations, media corporations. So they're marketing their entertainment products. So what? They're doing that. They're in a manner they're controlling the way people think, or they're not really controlling the way people think, but they're sort of manipulating the public discourse, and that's going the way it's going. And then you have them shutting down people's ability to comment, people's ability to say things, good or bad. This is in terms of this gag thing that Baines mentioned. The taking away people's ability to comment on stuff, and that's happened more and more and more. So you're being, not only are you forced to join these camps, this kind of social camps, this tribalist way of thinking, you're also having your ability to communicate or react against it being taken away from you. Your voice is being removed. Now no longer is it individuals having like an equal voice against what these corporations produce, which is, people characterize it as trolling, people characterize it as the man baby, whatever. It doesn't matter. What it is a certain amount of the community actually having this voice against what these corporations are trying to sell them. And that is being removed, and now we're only being talked to rather than, talked at rather than being talked to. And that is a problem, because these voices are coming down to us from high. The internet massively democratized speech and communication around the world, and now that's being taken away from us once again. And it's not governments sort of having this voice against us, it's corporations. And you have far less, with governments, at least you have the illusion of democracy, the illusion of control, because you can vote people out. But with corporations, you do not have that at all. We have this idea of, we can just have these organized campaigns and stop buying from them. That doesn't work, because these corporations control absolutely everything. There's a very limited control that the consumer has. So that does sound, conspiracy thinking on an Orwellian approach, and I'm trying not to make that sound that way, because this is just reality.
Well, we do have monopolies,
monopolies. That's basically
social media. It's just a fact. It's not a conspiracy.
Well, we have.
They're effectively monopolies. Facebook is a monopoly.
Google is a monopoly. I loved Google back when they started, because they were going against the crap that Microsoft was selling us with their rubbish Internet Explorer and their rubbish ways of doing things. Suddenly we have Google, and Google was also doing that with Apple as well. Apple was giving us this garbage Safari and whatever else, and iOS, suddenly we have a competitor. Now Google is massively controlling everything. YouTube, all search results, all websites have to conform to what Google says in order to go on their their search engine, which is the only way people look for things. And we have Google, we have Facebook, we have Apple, iTunes. We have these very limited pipes that we get our information through, and if you don't conform to that, well, you're out. You're dead. And
I stayed on Ask Jeeves as long as I could.
DuckDuckGo.
Yeah, well, DuckDuckGo. You have DuckDuckGo. Yeah.
John Duck should affiliate with them.
And actually, we have the quote unquote privilege to experience what our grandfathers experienced on the turn of the previous century, different kinds of monopolies. Because as the world becomes more and more digitized and work becomes more and more digitized and taking place on the internet, and you have these, and it is basically unregulated in terms of democratic rule, and like you have in the internet is basically a commodity now. It has become a commodity, like having power in your house and running water in your bathroom. So it shouldn't actually be privatized in any way, and it should be regulated by international law rather than regulated by corporations. Corporations shouldn't be allowed to have monopolies on the internet, because they create the same problems that were created in the marketplace when there were monopolies without the regulation of the states or the regulation of international agencies and organizations that are responsible for, keeping everyone to be at least humane to a basic minimal degree. So what you have now, what we are experiencing now, is the negative impact of monopolies on real life. You will have people gagged, you will have people marginalized, you will have people basically thrown out of competition and access, like with the several speeds of the internet and stuff like that. You will have people digitally isolated from the community and stuff like that. So that's the biggest thing. And the problem is that again comes coupled with it is that you do have people being exposed to fascist tactics without actually being able to recognize them as that. And that means that they internalize certain things. And you might not like calling it fascist, okay, that was the Italian movement or whatever, but we're talking about autocratic methods of rule and of power struggles. Let's call it that, if you don't like fascist.
Can I just
authoritarian
interject though and say,
sure.
When we say this is fascist and this is autocratic, we're not saying there are a group of people above us deliberately controlling and deliberately being fascist and deliberately trying to force us into thinking this or saying that. What we're saying is this is an artifact of the structure. It automatically goes into this way. It is automatically fascist because it's an autocracy, because you have these corporations without oversight. That's
exactly, absolutely.
Automatically, that's how things go. It's not that there's
absolutely.
like Rockefeller or Rothschild or whatever, like this Illuminati above us. It's not that. It's just that's how it ends up.
That's right, Oz. Say that, throw them off our trail. We have to pretend we don't know.
Yeah, we're also wearing metal hats, also the main shorts. But the idea is,
and they're all worshiping this giant monster under the. But we won't go into that. We all know.
Yes.
It's not an Alex Jones thing. That's what I'm trying to say.
The thing I want to underline about this is that there was a time in a very recent past where the word fascist wasn't the problem. The word Nazi wasn't the problem. And the idea, why am I mentioning this? Because it became problematic after they both went to the very, very extremes, but they didn't start this way. They started by their effort to control social reaction in what they wanted to do. And that included support from corporations because it was extremely profitable. Not only during the war where we have these complete insane aberrations that go beyond the imagination of the normal person, but before that, during peacetime, you had extreme profit taken by having the support of monopolies and allowing for monopolies to exist through certain tactics that were just very institutionalized at the time in the level of the state, as is happening right now in the internet through policies that are being very official, through Google, through whatever, YouTube or Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, put a name on it, that are saying, we are not going to do this to protect you from that. And so we're going to stop you from saying and doing and hearing and being exposed to this and that, which is basically the same approach. It's the same approach. If you look at the pattern, you cannot but see it if you take away the trappings of different eras and different lingo, if you want.
It's unfortunately what happens when you try and control things, and you take away people's, you take away that democratic voice of people. You take away that people's power, and you limit it through those reduced channels and without oversight. Anyway, it's
fascinating stuff. It's troubling.
It's a massively complicated subject, and it's easy to keyword it, to reduce it down into simplistic factors, and misrepresent it and turn it into something silly. Which is part of the problem. It's so easy to mess it up. Anyway, this has been our very complicated QUACKCAST. Can we be better?
Complicated.
Complicated. Can we be better?
And babies are eating vampires or something.
and frogs are doing things, unspeakable things.
Yes, horrible things. Yes, saucy things.
Sexy things. All right.
Sexy things.
Bye-bye, guys. You sexy frogs, you.
Bye-bye.